I was a couple of clicks away. All right, and we are right back with Bo Sanders. Well, I wanted to have one of those days where all the audio stuff, all the clicking and clacking would have worked, and I was just about there. Hey, so we're chatting with Bo Sanders, who I think is a quite provocative thinker. And practitioner. And as we were talking with Bo Sanders here, Bo does a couple of things. He's a PhD. Bo, are you currently a PhD student? Is that right?
Yeah, I just finished my coursework, and now I'm doing research design at UCLA.
Oh, way to go!
Thanks, yeah. Ultimately, but I'm at Claremont School of Theology.
So you're at Claremont School of Theology, working on your doctorate.
Yeah, in practical theology, specifically religious education.
Which is kind of one of the interesting things I think about the work that you do. So you do that, and then you also do the homebrew Christianity, where you're wanting to take these complex ideas and thoughtful commentators and religious voices and to make them accessible to people. And so you have a commitment to sort of two ends of things: the high end academic end, and the social media, internet side, distributive end, right? Like, hey, if the ideas are good enough, they should be understandable by people, who listen to podcasts and, sit in coffee shops and talk with their kids. And there's something about that, right? In physics, there's this desire for a physics principle to be beautiful. Like, it has to be simple enough, straightforward enough, and have some aspect of beauty to the whole thing. Do you think that the situation that North American Christianity finds itself in, let's say, and I put that in a context as compared to European Christianity and sort of Latin American and African Christianity that I think are in different places, and maybe even Asian Christianity, but North American Christianity, because it has such an influence around the world on what it means to be Christian and how people do this. Do you think its problem is primarily that it's not thoughtful enough, or that it's not practical enough? So, that's a bit of a false contrast, but I want to set you up with that because you're a practical theologian.
He's trying to break down dichotomies, and now you're.
You are a practical theologian, which I know is not your choice. I mean, you didn't design the program. That's a category of educational structure. But as you experience this, you've started churches, you've done youth work, you pastor with people, you're married and have a great wife and some great kids, you have friends, like you live a normal sort of life too. You're not just an academic who has to say to themselves, like, well, look, I just do the like high end thinking stuff. Do you think the issues that North American Christianity faces, and you can be as broad or as specific as you want. Do you think we're overly? Do you think we're missing out on being thoughtful and smart, or that it's become totally irrelevant because it doesn't make any difference in anybody's lived experience?
No, I think that we are suffering for some things that happened in the 20th century. That a real divide happened between what would be called the liberal mainline church, which was huge, in the first 50 years of the 20th century, and now is in what they're calling a collapse narrative. And part of what happened was after the Second World War, when they were at their biggest, is that they were doing some real, critical scholarship would be an understatement to emphasize the critical part. And the accusation is that they emptied out their own gospel, that there was nothing to believe. Jesus didn't walk on water. Jonah wasn't swallowed by a whale. And so when you do that, you empty out the underpinnings of what you really believe. And it became, the accusation is, a country club. It was do nice things, be nice people. And then on the other side, though, you had the evangelical ascendancy and all the way from Billy Graham up to the religious right in the 80s and 90s, who, the honest truth is willfully education at many levels because they saw that as compromising the faith. And so you have an intentional distancing from that kind of thoughtful address. And we're suffering for it now. And so what's happening is in the middle, you've had this kind of emergent move of people who want to both hold on to things of faith, but also do it thoughtfully. And you have branches, just splinter groups, where it's becoming so fractured that sometimes it's nearly impossible for one group to even talk to another group because they're talking about such different things. And so I really, I come out of the evangelical background. I was charismatic, and then I emerged out of that. And it's interesting now that I work in a mainline church and go to a mainline school. But I still, identify by all of these kind of labels or signifiers. They mean something to me. And what is shocking to me is so let's take the Bible. So the people that have the strongest, the highest view of the Bible often, and I don't mind painting this with a broad stroke, often know the least about the Bible. And the people who know the most about the Bible often believe it the least. So we have a problem. We have shot ourselves in the foot.
Could that be the content? I mean, I'm somebody we spend a lot of time in the Bible, and I'm like, man, it sure seems like you got to pick one or the other. Man. There are days where I think, oh my gosh, because the story of the Bible, like we're going to read this section on this Sunday, because this is what we do in our community. It's a section with parables from Mark, and it's got the parable of the sower and the parable of the lamp and the parable of the other things. And like as those parables, like that'd actually be pretty good stuff if you just sort of pulled one out and made a little talk. But you realize once you pull it out, make a little point from it, help someone to see, hey, this is some great material for your life. You now are no longer doing what the Bible did when it gave you that story, right? You've now run off with it and you've made this other thing. And it really does feel like there has to be a choice. But anyway, that's a digression. So I interrupted your thought.
Well, no, I mean, so let's take a passage like Romans 10, verse 9, that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved, right? So
I know that one by heart, by the way. If you needed it, just a couple of dozen, I've got them. If you need that kind of thing, just call.
In this one passage, we have a problem, which is that people who are most into this, if you confess Jesus is Lord, often don't know the first century context that there was a Roman saying that Caesar is Lord.
Right.
And so that this statement is inherently political and subversive. And without knowing that, they think that it's personal and salvific, that if you confess with your mouth, right? So there's an ignorance of the first century context that makes it easy to say, I'm really into the Bible, but I don't know much about its context. Then you have another group that says, and this is the liberal camp, that says, we know the Caesar is Lord, but we also don't like talking about Jesus or God in like kingly or empire Caesar kind of ways anymore because it's hierarchical. So we're just not even going to do that verse. So they don't confess Jesus as Lord because, it's kind of imperial. So they wrinkle up their nose at that. So in the middle, you have the people who are going, wait a minute, this verse is here. I think we should do something with it. You don't know on this side, you don't know anything about kind of its political underpinnings. And on this side, you've moved so far beyond it that you don't want to do it because it's, imperial language. And then we're left in the middle going, well, what do I do with this?
Yeah. And I will throw in one more mix that maybe as you finish your practical theology degree, you can come with a solution to this. I think that is a what you've just described there is a great way to describe this prevailing dilemma that people are under. But then there's another one, and that's the problem that comes from the other side, which is evangelicals and non-mainliners have been concerned that Christianity be valuable beyond making you a better person in the country club, to the degree that it's not at all a requirement that it make you a better person. So then people live this experience, they do the religious thing, and they're not sure where and when the benefit of that is supposed to happen, right? So because the fear becomes, hey, don't let Christianity just become this thing where it like makes you a better person. Like somehow that became a way to down talk Christianity. Like, oh, it's just these guys, go listen to these guys, these gals, these people. All they're going to do is they're just going to tell you all these like ways to become a better person. Or I hear this from folks who get on guys like Joel Osteen. They're like, oh, that Joel Osteen. I mean, all that guy, he's like the Dr. Phil of religion. That guy, all he wants to do is tell people, to have hope and give people like this better way to, how to have your best life now. I mean, that's just so trite and there's days where I think, maybe we would all be better off if we had some system, religion, some practice, some community that was saying to us like, hey, you should know how to live as a better person.
You should try to be better.
Yeah, that's really, yeah.
I really, because I've started going to a yoga class. My wife's a yoga instructor and our church has a yoga thing. So I do this yoga deal. And every time I go, I think to myself, try to put yourself in the place of your friend, Ken Silva, who's this internet stalker friend of mine. I've never actually met him, so we have a friendship like that. And he just thinks that I'm the devil's spokesperson, and he thinks
I've read that.
And he thinks that yoga is ridiculous, and he won't talk to me about it. He just writes things and all this, and he represents a whole other group of religious people. So when I go to my yoga class, I say to myself, well, I'm part of a broad community, and my broad community includes this person that I've chosen to be my friend on the internet, including Ken. And I'm going to try to have some empathy and figure out what is he so afraid of here, right? Like if he experienced what I was experiencing, what would he be afraid of? And the other day, I'm at the end of my yoga class, and maybe I'm just experiencing, the chemical releases that come from, the practice. But I had this sense that a yoga class is the most threatening thing to churches because I felt like a better person at the end of it. And when I've been in the room upstairs where we do the religious Christian stuff, it's not always clear that I feel like a better person at the end of it. And I wonder what we're going to do about that. I wonder if, so again, to borrow the physics metaphor, in physics, one of the requirements for a new theory being valid is that it has to answer questions that others didn't answer and has to pose new options that other theories didn't pose. So it has to do something. It can't just be right like the other things are right. It can't be, a theory can't be another way to get the same answer, which is these are all just insider rules for the physics community. It doesn't make them more better or anything else. But that's not a bad idea to pick. Like, hey, maybe if it doesn't actually help us to be better people, individually or collectively or in the long term or in some way, but can we end up with a Christianity, you think, that actually has that kind of practical edge, that the practical side to it?
I think there is hope. There's reason for hope. I believe in a real and living, that the Spirit of God is at work in the world. I'm a huge fan of Pentecost. I think Pentecost is the most important story for Christians in the whole Bible. But, Doug, I think it's worse. I think it's even worse than you've painted it.
Oh, really?
I think we have a real problem, which is that the type of Christianity that for most people, when they think of Christianity in America, what they think of is a brand new type of Christianity. And so this, it can be aggressive, it's critical, it's involved in a culture war, and it reads the Bible in a very novel way. And so, when you start to get into, say, hermeneutics is a way to read the Bible, but the problem is that people who, like a Ken Silva, they don't use words like hermeneutics because they just read the Bible and they don't understand that they have a hermeneutic. They're trying to read it literally is a way to read the Bible. And so they don't use the word hermeneutics. So you can't talk about, well, how do we read the Bible? They said, no, you just read the Bible. And so it forms in all of these oddities. So in the last, say, 100 years, there's been a big move to say Christianity can't be ethics. It can't just be nice, be a better person.
Yeah.
But what's happened there is the more vigilant you are to defend the faith, the more seriously you take your brand of Christianity, the more in danger you are of being aggressive with people who don't agree with you, of having real animosity towards those who you think are compromising, and towards people who just don't care at all. So when somebody says, I'm a Bible believing Christian, my friend pointed this out the other day, I don't think to myself, I'll bet you they love their neighbor and serve the poor. When somebody says I'm a Bible believing Christian, you think they love guns and hate gays. And we've created a situation where the type of Christianity that is most prevalent in America, and now, thank God for the internet, there are some pastors who are getting famous for being very aggressive about a romantic, but I would say novel variety of Christianity. And so, yeah, this yoga thing isn't going anywhere, because if you set yourself up by saying it doesn't matter whether yoga makes you a better person, it's not the truth, and I have permission to get very aggressive with you because of that, I end up in Jesus' name acting unlike Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, it's just funny. When I got into Christianity in the early 1980s, and I came, came into it with no real background. So I've often felt as I've moved through the Christian tradition that I'm not insulting my grandparents by not believing something or not acting in a particular way, which gives someone a great amount of freedom compared to my, my friends who have to deal with, like, what's my dad going to think if I do that? Like my kids, right? Like if my kids deal with religion differently, they have a different experience than I did. So that can be tough. That can be tough on people. But I didn't really care or anything. But the world that I came into was full of, and maybe it's because I was hanging around like evangelicals who were involved in evangelism. But people used to talk a lot, I think in the 80s, in religion, about testimonies. Like, I was, and now I am. I used to be, and now I'm a little bit like this. And there was a frame for it, and it was very false. It was a very false frame. It was, I was blind, and now I see. And we've all felt more like that character in one of those Bible stories where Jesus heals him once, and the guy's like, I can barely see. I can see a little bit. And then he spits on his eyes a second time, and he says, oh, now I can see. It's like it was a two-timer. So I get it that there's a false frame, but it seems like even the aggressive versions of Christianity, what they tend to have that people gravitate toward is maybe it makes a difference. Maybe it matters somehow. And I wonder, as you do the practical theology stuff that you do, and and I spend a lot of time, babbling on, and I'm big into words, and Victoria's into words, and you're into words, and like we all like words, and they're good and they're powerful, and they're not just representative. They actually act in the world, like they do things. They're an energy that's part of the rest of the energy of the world, and they do things. But do you think that there's some hope that a kind of Christianity that you're describing, that I want to pursue, that Victoria's way ahead of us on, do you think there's some kind of, do you think that's going to involve the kind of narrative of I was, but now I am, built around life change? Because I think that we've exchanged a life change for an experience somehow. And I don't totally know what I mean by that, but I think if I explore that for a while, I mean something good by that. That there's something happening that we should pursue in life change, as opposed to just what did somebody have, how did that feel for you? Did it seem real? Did it feel powerful or something else? But was there actually a definitive change in someone?
So this is why I am so encouraged about this shift that we started talking about.
Yeah.
This postmodern shift, because instead of doing the old dualisms of I was bad before and I'm good now.
Yeah.
there's an introduction to, a more elaborate, a more nuanced way of both thinking and talking. And so inside of that, you can say, look, when I was outside of God's love, God still loved me. And even though I did bad things, I wasn't all bad. There was some good there. And now that I'm in touch with God's love, there's a lot of good, but there's also some bad in me. And that becomes an acceptable narrative that people can hear. Instead of you saying, I was all bad, now I'm all good. And they go, BS.
Yeah, right. I saw you Friday.
I see what you do. Yeah. You can say, so there's a new narrative that culturally we can participate in, which is, it's much more nuanced and multiplicitous, if you want to use a big word. And so there's many things going on all the time. So redemption becomes a story that I live into. And as long as I can say that I'm living into that in an ever increasing impact on my life, and it's reflected in the way I treat people and in the way I behave and live, then that narrative has validation. And somebody might be attracted to that narrative and want to live into that with me. And then we've got community. But what isn't working anymore is to say, before Jesus, I was all bad.
Yeah.
After Jesus, hallelujah, I'm all good. And people say, that can't be a true story.
Yeah. And that is, it feels like there's room for a little project on that, on the notion of life change and partnering. So there's a lot of us in the kind of emerging, missional sort of world that want to say, look, you know what we're better off doing? We're better off joining together with whomever wants to be part of the sort of agenda of God in the world. That's much better than trying to divide up who we partner with by some other set of standards. Like anybody who's in is fine. And Jesus has this two-versioned statement of those who aren't for us are against us, and he also has those who aren't against us are for us kind of idea, right? So you can have this. Yeah. Maybe you have actually a development of Christianity over time that tells us that same story in two different ways.
Doug, you know what I think is our best shot here? You know why I think Christianity has a chance? Because we have this tripod event of the cross, the empty grave, and Pentecost. And when you look at those three, that Christianity, no matter what it's become or it's historical, whether it got corrupted with Constantine or Christendom, or it doesn't matter, embedded in this seed, like in the basic story, is a death, a resurrection, and a dispersion. And in that, you have the hope that in Christ's death, we have life. But in our life, we carry death. And as things die, new life comes. And in that life, if a seed doesn't fall to the ground, it won't bear fruit. So you have death and life embedded within each other. Yes. And in Pentecost, that the Spirit of God was dispersed to the people of God, and that we all have that. We carry that with us. And no matter what has happened politically or historically, we have this hope, because in our most basic telling of our original narrative is both death and life, hope and surrender. So for me, that is a great source of hope, that we, at our most basic telling of the story, we tell a story.
Yeah. And this is where I think, to connect back to the previous half an hour, this is one of the ways that we validate what's real, by saying that which is true in that narrative, that we carry life and death. We see that in so many other aspects of our human experience. In our own bodies, we carry life, and we carry the seeds of our own death, right? Like it's already in us. Like the thing that's going to kill us, it's already happening, and the thing is creating life, and they're happening simultaneously. And there's, the same thing happens at every level, at the largest level of the cosmos and at the smallest level. You have both these things, from wave particle duality to energy and matter, right, being the same thing. You have all this harmony of that kind of story, and it feels to me like one of the things that used to exist in certain religious traditions, and where religion spreads, there's some version of it matters. It does it. Without it, something is missing, and I wonder if I don't want to return to the sort of world that I got into when you were teaching someone. I mean, we literally used to sit around and teach people how to have a testimony, right? It was hilarious. Like you'd say, "Okay, here's how you put it together," and there was this little saying.
Handouts and overheads?
Well, there were little sayings at least that were printed, I'm sure, on these things, and it was this: before, how, now.
Yeah.
Brown cow is how you remember. That's how I remember it all these years, like 25 years later. So before, how were you? Now, how are you? And how did that happen? Before, now, how? This kind of thing, right? And it's
formulaic.
It's very formulaic, and it's very silly, but maybe there's something in that. Maybe the way that in the time of the great revivals in North American history, there was this like formulaic little structure that allowed you to think of your life in categories you're not consciously thinking of your life, and I wonder if our religious experience don't need to be held to a standard of, look, if it doesn't make a difference, doesn't do some good, if there's not some outcome, then we need to question.
Well, I think what's important too is to recognize that the outcome doesn't have to be static. I mean, with those old testimonies, the problem was that it's then somehow the now is you've arrived, you're it.
You never got to go back to before. Yeah.
No, or that you're not on some journey, that you're not going to go somewhere else. I mean, the idea that we're all evolving. Part of what I love about this religious community, like amongst Doug Pagitt radio listeners and at Solomon's Porch, is that anything that I think a lot of us acknowledge with one another, that anything that we say or any idea that we have or conclusion that we're trying to come to can be subject to rethinking. And any place that we are, like right now, yoga is a great thing for me too, and running is a great thing. But that doesn't mean that's always going to be that way. And that any place that we are, I think so much of what we're talking about here, what is great about it is the idea of fluidity, that there's rhythms, there's cycles, that it matters, yes, but not in a static. Even when that's why I asked about prayer when we were talking about the name of God, that there's an event or that comes, but it brings forth and ushers in an opportunity for these rhythms, these cycles, this mattering, not in a definitive one-time end point, but in a process.
So can I bring us full circle to end?
Please.
So we started with these 5 things I said were going on in religion. And if you go through them again after this fantastic conversation, you'll see why each of them is so important. So experience, we're saying there has to be an experience, and people are having real experience. But we also want to add to that formation. Doug, you're saying if it doesn't form us as a person of character, as a community, but there has to be an element of formation. We are formed by our tradition. We've acknowledged that there's an event, that God talk is different than other kinds of talk, but there's also a mystery, that there's more going on than we have language for, that we need to listen to other people, that they're telling us something that is beyond our ability to comprehend. And no matter how much we understand, there's so much more we will never understand. So that brings humility. And then that final thing is what Doug is saying is, well, maybe there's something real in it.
Yeah, and only then might you know.
Yeah.
Hey, Bo Sanders, we love you on this show. You're a genius. You should listen to the...
I'm convinced.
See?
You won me over.
Wow.
Well, you should have heard the earlier parts. She was like calling me to the carpet on what my standards were. And I'm like, well, I'm not a person who's been accused of having many standards. So I don't know why I would have to have them on this topic. But Hey, thanks so much for being part of the show.
I appreciate it so much. Thanks for the opportunity. I actually love listening to the show, and I want you to say hi to my mentor, Randy Woodley, because he's coming out to see you soon.
Oh,
In
hey,
fact,
Randy.
yes, Randy is coming out,
He's
and
coming.
I'm going to try to do a little interview with him for the show, and also he's going to be in our community at Solomon's Porch here in a couple of weeks. I think 2 weeks, but he doesn't fly in airplanes, which I'm trying not to have judgment about, because it's a fine choice to make. But he's probably left Portland already and making his way here. Would that be true? Do you know, like, how long does it take to get from Portland to Minneapolis on a train?
I'm assuming like 4 days.
I'm guessing so. So he may already be en route, but we can't wait to have him in. Bo, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
We will see you soon, my friend.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks everybody for being on, listeners and participants
on
Doug Pagitt Radio. And we weren't even going to be able to do we're not even doing the Cripes. Come on, you got to be kidding me! And right on today, it got.
But I have one thing to say. I'm going to post a blog for the first time on the show.
Starting this week, Victoria's going to have her own Right On, and it's our little play on words spelled WRITE.
That's right.
Right
so
On
you can
from
read
Victoria.
it on Doug Pagitt Radio. Another reason to go to the page and get one of these books.
Yes, and it will be posted at the Doug Pagitt page on Facebook and also on the radio page, Doug Pagitt Radio.
Yep.
So hey, and whoever I don't know who yet has won the Immortal Diamond, but we will be in touch, and I'll send a little something out for you podcast listeners so you can win something too. So if you listen to the podcast and you see like a little 15 or 20 second podcast in the next couple of days, listen to that. It's going to be your chance to win. So thanks a lot. Thanks for being part of the show. Thanks for to Bo Sanders, because it was great having Bo on. Didn't you think? Wasn't it great having?
Yes.
Wasn't it great having Bo on?
Fantastic.
Yeah. So all right. Hey, we'll talk to you next week. We'll be back live out of the Twin Cities. Doug Pagitt. Doug Pagitt Radio. Doug and Victoria Lynn saying adios.